Good morning, happy fall, and welcome to a new season of Shenkman Wealth Management webinars. This program is entitled A Practical Guide on the Life Cycle of Planning for Art Collections. As always, I like to emphasize to my audience, these programs are open to everybody. So if you have a colleague, a client, a friend that would like to be on my webinar distribution list, just have them send me an email directly at jonathan@shenkmanwealth.com with the word webinar in the subject line, and I'll be sure to add them to my webinar distribution list. Just by way of background, for those who don't know me, my name is Jonathan Shenkman. I'm the president of Shenkman Wealth Management. In that role, I work as a financial advisor, portfolio manager, and serve in a fiduciary capacity to help my clients achieve their financial objectives. My goal of my program is to bring professionals together to help them better serve their clients. This is done by educating attendees on the latest topics in wealth planning and by encouraging collaboration between a client's attorney, CPA, and financial advisor where appropriate. My practice focuses on working with high net worth families, businesses, and not-for-profits. I manage individual investment portfolios, trust accounts, corporate retirement plans, and endowments to help my clients achieve their financial goals. In addition to the 25 or so events I run every year, I also do a fair amount of writing on the topics of investing and financial planning. You could read my work in Barron's, Bloomberg, CNBC, Fortune, Forbes, Kiplinger, the Wall Street Journal, the CPA Journal, Trust and Estates Magazine, and many other periodicals. You can see all my work on my website at shenkmanwealth.com/articles or by following me on social media at Shenkman on Money. Additionally, I just launched my podcast, which also is called Shenkman on Money, and you can check that out on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Today, we're privileged to hear from Sherri Cohen, who's the global head of Fiduciary Client Group at Sotheby's and is based in New York. Just by way of background, Sherri joined Sotheby's in 2023 as the Senior Vice President and the Global Head of the Fiduciary Client Group. She's responsible for leading the New York, London, and European teams, working in close collaboration with the entire Sotheby's Global Business Development Team, and assists lawyers, bankers, family offices, and fiduciaries in planning for the life cycle of their clients' art collections through Sotheby's broad range of services. Sherri's a dual qualified attorney in New York, as well as the solicitor in the United Kingdom. Prior to joining Sotheby's, Sherri was head of business development of North America at Bonhams. Before working in the auction industry, Sherri served as a chief underwriting counsel at Aris, an A-rated art title insurance company, as well as for the New York State Agency, helping claimants to recover property which was lost, looted, or sold under duress due to Nazi persecution. She started her career at Jones Day and worked on litigation, arbitration, art law, and corporate matters. Today, Sherri will be speaking on a practical guide on the life cycle of planning for art collections. And with that introduction, I will now turn the program over to Sherri.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm delighted to be here with you this morning. Unfortunately, my colleague Kimberly couldn't make it, so bear with me as we take you through the slides. So let's start. Here's kind of our roadmap of where we're going to go, talking about market trends, really the due diligence and lifetime of owning art, and then we'll end on some issues addressing estate administration. So what is happening in the art market? I think it's always good to start as a look back and think about what happened. We had sales in November, in May, and then some sales in London in June, thinking about at auctions. So a lot of art has been traded, maybe not as much as in the previous year. Reports are that it's down anywhere from 14, 18, 23% or flat, depending upon whose numbers you're looking at. But just in June at London, in our Sotheby's sale, we sold this beautiful Klimt Girl with a Fan painting for 108 million. So that was the most expensive work ever traded in Europe at public auction. So that's a pretty phenomenal result. So it's really hard to say that we're in a downturn or a correction. So there is kind of this mixed messaging. In New York, there were phenomenal blue chip works. Again, another Klimt sold at Sotheby's in the $53 million range, a gorgeous Rousseau at Christie's. And then, of course, the single owner estate sales really shined and kind of delivered, maybe not as phenomenal as in past years, but they certainly hit within the mid estimate range. For confident buyers, we would say it's new opportunities. Money is not cheap, as Jonathan knows. There's higher interest rates. But if you're a seller, you're a seller, and that is true. I would say there's definitely been a flight to quality. And when things are priced right, sort of conservatively, they're doing well. There's not this like frenetic bidding, it's a bit more quiet. In sort of the non-art world, jewelry is really also very strong. Christie's had the Horton sale over $200 million, which was the largest, most expensive jewelry sale ever. There's been some PR controversy about that you can read about in terms of provenance. Also at Sotheby's, we were very privileged to sell two gorgeously colored stones, a pink diamond and a ruby, each selling for about 35 million. Other amazing world records that you can dig into. So what are the trends? What does this mean in terms of predictions? Something that Sotheby's commissioned with Art Tactic that I think is key if you're very keen to learn more about the art market was a study looking at data for trading of art at the $1 million mark. And I think it's the first study of this published, and it looked at sales results from Christie's, Phillips, and Sotheby's at auction, and also Sotheby's private sales, which is kind of unique. And that's available for download. If any of you are interested, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to send you a copy of that. Not surprisingly, or maybe surprisingly to you, this $1 million mark, it's only about 4% of the volume traded, but 74% of the total. And that's the kind of things we think about when we're looking at what's really trading. The biggest category was in the $1 to $5 million range, but the biggest growth was over the $20 million price band, and that accounted for about 45%, which we kind of call trophy art. In terms of who's bidding, Asian bidders are certainly making themselves known. They're up about 32%, and they're most active in the Chinese works of art and paintings category. In terms of the breakdown, millenniums are getting in there more, 16% in 22 in terms of bids. The Gen X, about 32%. Baby boomers are hanging in there. They're about 40% of our bids, down from 48%. So they're totally not irrelevant to the market, but certainly diminishing in terms of their impact. And then I would just say the fastest growing category is these artists born after 1977. And then Old Masters is sort of making a comeback in terms of like the trophy 20 plus market. Of course, Old Masters are rare and you can't get them anymore. In terms of predictions, I would say, art is a collecting category that's driven by passion. A Goldman Sachs report recently said that 71% of all buy art for the passion, about 39% buy because it's uncorrelated historically to the rest of their portfolio, and 19% are buying for trophy. Another sort of area to watch is sort of surrealist and women. If you combine them together, you're actually sort of at the peak of what artists want or collectors want. I think another interesting fact is that the sort of evolution of the auction house model is really continuing post-COVID. And two things I'll say about that. One, the luxury resale category is really strong. We're not talking retail, we're talking resale. In 22, it was about a $15 billion market, and that's grown, or we expect it to grow 3x by 25 to just under 50 billion. So that's really an area to watch. One more thing that, when you think about the next kind of collector, what drives them, it's really kind of like the passion that speaks to them, whether it's sneakers or the wet paint, really contemporary art, luxury, sustainability, who's creating it. I think that's all really important to know. Last fact on this slide, which is going to blow your minds, is that about 92% of our bids were online. So we're still having live sales and we're still doing online sales, but most people are actually doing, the bidding on their mobile devices or whatnot. And also, NFTs are still around. So let's transition to talk about the due diligence of art and what you're thinking about art as you're collecting in your lifetime. It's important to think about this legacy. Art is not just something that you have to deal with as a fiduciary in the estate. It's something that wealth managers and advisors, you should be thinking about holistically in your client's portfolio. And it's a really unique asset that requires special expertise. So the first thing is sort of like asking questions, like nailing down the who, what, when, where of a collection during lifetime is extremely important, because the person that put the collection together often has the most relevant information and all of the sort of the nuances that you need. So starting with the collection is very important. Why did you collect? What is your passion? What's the ultimate plan? How do you live, with your art? If you're purely an investor, it might all be in storage. You might not see it. If you're very passionate, it might be, you have a salon style kind of home, which is, something I wish to achieve one day. What do you want to keep? What do your children want to keep? Often, the generational gap, you don't have the same tastes as your parents, and that's totally normal. Something else to think about is document retention. It's very important to keep those bills of sale as much as possible. Photographs can be helpful when a price is being, a work is being priced, and determining its provenance is really key. So keep all that together, exhibition loan agreements, whatnot. If you think about like a conceptual artist like Dan Flavin that's, does the light bulbs, if you don't have the certificate of authenticity, it's really just light bulbs. And that can mean a very big swing in valuations. This can have a tremendous impact on value. I love these two examples that we have. One of the spotted dish, which turned out to be a very important Chinese dish from the 1700s that sold for about $1 million in 2016. And we had received a call for fair market value for an estate tax appraisal, and it had been sort of treated as sort of a nothing. And then the team spotted it, pun intended, and we were able to sell it for such a top price. Likewise, this spotted owl by Picasso was used as sort of a doorstop in a kid's room where, balls were being thrown around, and we sold it for $4 million, a world record for a work of that type. And it had been valued for about 20K. So it's really important to know what you have and to pass that information to the next gen. Let's talk now about appraisals. The important thing with appraisals is to really understand the purpose for the use and to make sure that you're getting the right kind of valuation. So I've laid out here the different kinds, whether it's for income tax, fair market value, gift tax, fair market value, estate tax, fair market value, and of course, insurance, the highest value possible, which is retail replacement value. The FMV value is an IRS definition. Buyer and seller having all of the same information, neither being under compulsion to sell. And it's sort of that price of willing exchange. And we look at, when we're doing the comparables, we look at comparables of things sold at auction. If not at auction, we would look to retail, what you would get from let's say a gallery or whatnot. And then retail replacement, which is the insurance value, is like if you had to go out tomorrow and find a painting of the same. We know art is unique and rare, and that price tends to be about 30% higher. Digging in a little bit more to scrutiny and appraisals. I mean, there's two cases that really kind of define this. The first being Publicker versus Commission, which addressed the fair market value and buyer's premium. And the case found that sales prices established FMV, not the proceeds received to the seller, which is really important. So the buyer's premium is a component of the purchase price and included when calculating the FMV. And then the other case we like to think about when doing appraisals, especially in a estate or a context, is the Neuberger case from 2015. And that talked about the impact of subsequent sales. And this was Mrs. Neuberger's estate. The court found that allegedly underreported the value of the artwork because she died around the time of the global recession. And so at that time, the values were depressed, and then they actually ended up selling the work in when the art market had rebounded, and the prices was 2 times. So it's an interesting paradigm to think about when you are contemplating any sales as part of an estate sort of plan. The best way forward for an appraisal is to use the combined appraised values for things that you might be keeping and any sales values. That's the bulletproof way to get above any scrutiny from the IRS. And then I'll just say, in terms of NFTs, the Department of Treasury and IRS are currently in the process of seeking guidance on the tax treatment and whether or not NFTs should be treated as collectibles under Section 408M or sort of an asset. And that is critical. I mean, one of the ways they're looking at it is through the look-through analysis. So what really is the essence of the NFT? Is it the associated right with it, or is it like an asset? And the reason that that's important is because it'll affect the capital gains tax treatment, whether it's 15% or 28%. So TBD on that. One more thing about buyer's premium, it can be a deductible expense if it's allowable in the jurisdiction under which the estate is being administered. And also if it's sort of written into the will and the trust that the art must be sold, or it's necessary to pay the decedent's debt. So that's an important factor to think about. One more thing I'll say, because this has come up a lot, is blockage discount. It's important to think about when you're getting the appraisal, is there any applicable discount? If it's an artist estate, often that comes into play. If the artist had a lot of works, and we're not just talking about works by the same artist, but works of the same type. So paintings versus works on paper. And then if there's an ownership split, there could also be making a case for a discount. It's very fact dependent, so be careful. We've seen discounts anywhere from 10% to 37% to up to 80%. So it really runs the gamut. And there's been a lot of litigation about this. You can look up cases involving Georgia O'Keeffe, de Kooning's daughter Lisa, David Smith, and a lot of other important things. So one more thing I'll say about appraisals before we talk about some fun examples is that the IRS really wants to see that you have engaged a qualified appraiser to create a qualified appraisal. And I know that's very circular. I mean, one other thing to think about is USPAP. And so make sure that the appraiser that you're working with is USPAP qualified, and that is the standard that the IRS relies on. And USPAP stands for the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. So let's talk about some fun examples, because the market is not static. It's actually quite many sub-markets in the art market. And here's some fun examples of when the prices have actually exploded. I'm sure you all recognize this Basquiat picture that just kind of flew. It was sold in 1984 for just under $20,000. And then in 2017, if you can believe it, for $110 million. That was quite the world record. So that's a great return on your investment. I'm sure Jonathan would agree with that. Abstract expressionist female artists are also on the run now, doing fantastic at market. This beautiful Helen Frankenthaler traded for just around over 800,000 K in 2011. And then we had the privilege of selling it in 2020 for just under 8 million. So you can see how important it is to update your appraisals if you're doing anything with art. I mean, the rule of thumb is anywhere from 1 to 5 years, and it really depends on what the kind of material it is that you're looking at. And there's lots of factors that can impact what's happening with an artist's market. Insurance. Of course, insurance is very important when you're talking about art. It's one of our most expensive things that we do here at Sotheby's, and it's very important that your art is properly insured. I'm always shocked when I come across a major collection that isn't fully insured. So the Steve Wynn story of Picasso's, this famous Picasso, is kind of fun to look about, because this is not the norm of what happens. In 1997, of course, the casino magnate Steve Wynn purchased this beautiful picture for about $50 million. And then in October of 2006, he told a group of his friends, famous friends, that he had sold, sort of bragging that he'd sold the work for $39 million, excuse me, to Steve Cohen, which at that time would have been, the most expensive artwork ever sold. He's showing it off. He, gets his elbow through the canvas, making a tear. The cost of the restoration was about $90K. The painting was then reevaluated for appraisal at $85 million. He filed a claim, was able to recover $54 million. Of course, the insurers balked. There's litigation and so forth. End of this story. The guy is very lucky. A few years later, he still sells it to Cohen, but even for a higher price at $155 million. That is not the norm of what happens, but it shows you how difficult art is, and you really have to know what you're doing and to make sure that your art is stored in safe conditions. And that might be, far away from the wall, so it's safe from children and elbows and all sorts of other things. It's all too common, I would say. Also, we're talking about safety in an estate situation, that your painting gets legs or whatnot, or your jewelry walks away. Make sure that doesn't happen too. Oops. Let's talk a little bit about authentication, because when we're thinking about due diligence of art, and generally speaking about whether things are right, there's certain categories. It can be in contemporary, but most often old masters, impressionists, and whatnot. In Europe, this authentication process is called the droit moral. We don't quite have the same standard here in the US. We do have legislation called VERA, but it doesn't go quite as far. I would say the Mark Chagall Committee is a great example of when to be cautious. All works need to go to Paris for inspection, so you can imagine the logistics of sending things and how that works. Auction houses and others sort of in the know can help you sort of navigate that process. You have to sign away your life and sort of a waiver saying, you know, you understand the process for review. Unfortunately, if the committee does not think that the work is right, they could destroy it. So that's very much a calculated risk that you should think through. I'll just say a couple words about the Simon Whelan Andy Warhol Foundation case, that this is sort of the horror story of when things started to go wrong about litigation and authentication. The story goes that the Warhol Foundation spent about $7 million in legal fees, good for the lawyers, really bad for the art market in the sense that after that, there was sort of this snowball of how nobody really wanted to authenticate works. One more horror case while we're on it, back to Basquiat. I couldn't skip this one, but there was an exhibition in Orlando just this past year of June where I find the name quite ironic. The show was called Heroes and Monsters, and unfortunately, all of the work was fake. And so there's been a lot of brouhaha sort of after the fact. I will say when Basquiat's father was alive, he was sort of controlling the authentication. Basquiat has two sisters who have had a limited role in reviewing the works. And like other, there's a catalog raisonné going ahead. If there isn't an expert in the market, I think that another kind of way to check to see if a work is right is to see if it's in the literature. But back to the Orlando case, the fallout has really been that the museum from the American Alliance of Museums has been placed on probation, which is very rare, an unfortunate move. The museum has fired the director and litigation has ensued. So it's not a great situation. So restricted materials is another sort of aspect of this due diligence review. I'm sure you may be familiar with the Sotheby case, which happened in 2012. It's still quite relevant today. And the essential question in the case is, what is the value of an object that contains a restricted material, such as an endangered species? Here in the Rauschenberg, you see the bald eagle. But other restricted materials that might be in art objects includes ivory, rosewood, or other materials that violate CITES. So the IRS continues to take quite the outlandish position that if there is a market anywhere, even an illicit market, and this kind of stems, there was an old case that dealt with cocaine, for that material, even if it's black and illegal, then that's a legitimate way to price. So what happened in this case is that the estate initially valued it at zero because you can't trade it. It's got this bald eagle that's now illegal to sell. The IRS appraisers at first came back with saying, nope, it's 15 million. The art panel, the IRS art panel got involved, which is a special group of private art market people that sort of volunteer and work with the IRS appraisal services if there's a tax audit and there's work over 50K, which is actually quite a low threshold. But anyhow, the art panel got involved and they raised the estimate to say it was, no, this is a masterpiece. It should be 65 million, arguing regardless of the prohibitions on selling or transferring bald eagles, that would be the value. Good news, end of story. The work is now sitting in the Museum of Modern Art here in New York, and the estate didn't have to pay any estate taxes. They also weren't able to get a charitable deduction, so good news. I would say the best case scenario when you're dealing with these kinds of materials is to deal with the headache inter vivos in life when you have the capacity to kind of come up with creative solutions, whether it's gifting the ivory without charitable deductions. Some jurisdictions do permit this, although you probably, it's not permissible to move things across state lines for the most part. In terms of theft, restitution, especially thinking about World War II restitution, is still very much happening. We have a very active practice here at Sotheby, so it's important to think about the artwork, if it was created before, 1933 to 1945 and in continental Europe, make sure that you have sort of a provenance tied up there. We are still seeing things that have been restituted being sold. These are two interesting works that recently sold, actually in this year in March and January. Some fascinating stories. I would say for the Bronzino, we were actually able to, that's the work of the gentleman in the black coat, to attribute the work to Bronzino, and actually achieved a world record price for nearly $1 million, with all of the proceeds going to charities to support Holocaust survivors. So that's a very good story. And I think that the world of World War II restitution is fascinating, but unfortunately, again, talking about people that have the knowledge, much of that information is gone, and so there's a lot to be said in terms of current litigation and negotiations. So let's talk now about what to do with the art when you have an estate administration situation, when you've already been living with the art legacy in your lifetime. I think it's important to think about a lot of questions. And, I think as lawyers, we tend to ask questions, and that really will lead how you deal with the art in the estate. So I think the first major question is it a federally taxable estate? I'm sure, we all know now the lifetime exemption is currently set for $12.9 million per married person. And then you are obliged at the top rate to have a 40% estate tax rate. And for non-US persons, you might trigger the federal estate tax if you have art within the US jurisdiction. And if it's here, let's say in a cousin's apartment or whatever. And it's important to note that the exemption for non-resident aliens for art or other assets is just $60K. So it's quite a low threshold when you're talking about important art. So if it's a federal taxable state, and then of course states have different tax levels to think about as well. In New York, here we have the odd cliff, but it's important to note the timeline if you do have any sales, and given the required 706 filing deadline. So that is either 9 months or the alternative date, which would be 15 months after date. Even if there is an extension, the values, so if you're going for the 15-month, will need to be provided at 9 months post-death and payment anticipated then. So I will say, when you're dealing with high net worth persons that have multiple residents and lots of different kinds of categories of property, that time can go by very fast, especially when there's volume and research and all the things that we've been talking about, that can be quite onerous. So make a note of that. I mean, the other thing is to think about sort of the scope of the required estate tax appraisal. So are you going to list every, teaspoon and saucer, or are you going to focus on, more important things over the 50K threshold that the panel might be looking at? So it's important to have sort of a clear approach. Of course, for estate tax purposes, all of your tangible assets must be included in the appraisal, but you can think about how to structure the actual report. And then going back to where we started, sort of what were the decedent's wishes regarding the tangibles and the art? How did they paper the distribution of the assets? Were there specific bequests? Something to think about when you're doing specific bequests is back to the valuations issue. Is there an equalizer, or was it that you wanted, one particular daughter to have this painting because she always admired it? And that's okay too, because art is unique and rare, except if we're talking about multiples of the same print. And then, if it's not formally written, which can be written and also is not always binding, but might be a good idea, would be sort of what we call like a letter of wishes or intentions. And that's a great way to indicate to the fiduciaries and the executors and the trustees kind of how you would like for your art assets to be handled. But what did they say in their lifetime? Often, unfortunately, we get the scenario where, the daughter calls and says, my mom said this is very, very valuable, and it just isn't. So that can happen as well. Understanding like how is the ownership of the property held? So is there a trust, an LLC? And then, who's around? Is there a surviving spouse? Does she want the art, or not? I mean, these are all things to think about. Are there children? And then, of course, when you're thinking about probate, where is the property actually located? Is it in different jurisdictions within the US or countries? Does that trigger any ancillary probate? So get your ducks in the row, get all your papers together. Hopefully that has already happened. Make sure the insurance is in place, secure the locations, also check condition. I'm always kind of shocked. You come in and everything is quite a mess, but is it stable? Do things need to be cleaned as a fiduciary or conserved? How will that impact value? Because obviously condition is one factor. Is the estate illiquid? I mean, there's lots of options in terms of art lending. Would that be preferable to use the art as collateral for bridge loan for potential sale, depending upon the timing? And when does the estate tax deadline fall if there will be sale? So it's still quite traditional in the terms that the marquee sale weeks, the most valuable art, is sold in New York in November and May. And that's just, I mean, there are alternative times to sell things, but that's pretty much the standard. And then, of course, thinking about philanthropy, like, was that part of the plan? Have there been conversations with museums in lifetime? Hopefully, yes. If not, was there a list of museums that might be a good fit? And then, of course, you require the applicable charitable gift tax donations. And then just pitfalls. I think it's key. I'll just leave you with a couple of thoughts, but to remember that art is a very emotional asset. It's not like, your Apple stock. I think people could be quite attached to their iPhones, but art is different. Please don't leave art to the end of the estate administration process. As I've tried to articulate, there's lots of twists and turns, and it can be very complicated and take a lot of time. Don't assume certain art is valuable or not without checking with the experts. Know which works require authentication, work with, an international auction house or someone who knows what they're doing. Also the same for regulated materials. Don't try to leave these problems to your children. Try to be transparent, so don't take out expensive art or jewelry out of the probate process. We used to call this empty hook estate planning. Try to align the heirs so they know, like, they agree on the best way forward. Are you going to sell everything? Is everything going to be gifted? I mean, of course, can't always avoid disputes, but often we find that there is sort of fighting between siblings and heirs over the art. I think it's always a great idea to start with the top in terms of like the international auction house to assess the collection. They can always make recommendations and actually empower you to get better service if it's not a good fit through their connections. And then, I mean, we haven't even talked about selling, but that's a whole trying to understand what is the best way to deal with the art. Is it a private sale? Is it auction, live or online? I will say auction is always a great option for those with a fiduciary duty because it's the most transparent. Understanding the different venues where to sell, if something should be sold in Italy or Paris or London or New York. I think it's really important to understand that. And then how to maximize the sort of estate aspect through storytelling of the family's legacy or anonymity, if that is best for this piece, really trying to be strategic and thoughtful in dealing with the estate property. With that, I'll turn it back to Jonathan.
Great. Thank you so much, Sherri, for that informative presentation. If anyone has any specific questions, new business opportunities, or any other issues they'd like to discuss, please feel free to reach out directly to Sherri or myself where appropriate, and I'll be sure to include her contact information in the follow-up email to this program, which I'll send out tomorrow morning. As I mentioned at the onset, the goal of these programs stay up to date on timely wealth management related topics and to collaborate where appropriate. And I think we can all agree that the clients who are best prepared are the ones who are served by a team of knowledgeable advisors. 4 more quick items before I let you go. First, my fall webinar series continues on September 28th on planning under Secure 2.0 and the proposed regulations, featuring Bruce Steiner of counsel at Kleinberg, Kaplan, Wolf & Cohen based in New York. Again, if you have a friend or colleague or client who would like to be notified of my fall webinar series, they can just email me the word webinar in the subject line, and I'll be sure to add them to my webinar distribution list. Second, you can follow all my work on Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram at Shenkman on Money. And you could also listen to my new podcast called Shenkman on Money, which is available on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Third, please take 30 seconds to fill out my survey at the end of this program. It helps me improve my webinars and provide timely and interesting content to attendees. And I thank you in advance for that. And finally, I want to wish everybody who's celebrating Rosh Hashanah this week, and even those who are not, Ashana Tova, Matuka, La'alter, L'chaim, Tovim, and Shalom. May the coming year be filled with good luck, blessing, good health, lots of wealth, and happiness, and only good things for you and your family. And with that, this concludes today's session. Please stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful day, everybody.